Sault Ste. Marie. From Central Patricia, Ontario, when I was 6 or 7 years old, they gathered us all up, put us on a big bus, and we made our way to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which means we had to go from Central Pat all the way down to Ignis, through Thunder Bay, and then all the way down into Sault Ste. Marie, where Shinwalk Hall is located, the residential school that we eventually ended up at. By we, I mean my uncles, my cousins, my friends, anybody that was going to the Central Pat public school got uplifted and taken to Sault Ste. Marie. The residential school policy was in full effect. So what happened is from Central Patricia all the way over to Sault Ste. Marie, can you imagine the culture shock that we went through? I remember the culture shock. I remember the shock of it all. After a couple days of traveling as a kid, going all the way down into Sault Ste. Marie, I remember crying on the bus and going, man, I want to go home. Or I want to go home. You know, like this isn't fun no more. But I remember being told to shut up and sit back down. But we ended up in Shinwalk Hall in Sault Ste. Marie. And that is where I stayed for a year. Well, I must have stayed there about a year and a half, I don't know. But during this period in time in Shinwalk Hall, my family back home, and what happened to quite a few families because of the residential school policy. And this is a point where it took me years to understand what actually happened. I already knew what happened to us. We ended up in Shinwalk Hall. But I had to go back and think about how my mother felt, or other Native women felt when their kids got extracted from them, forcibly taken, mothers and fathers. And at that time, Central Patricia was a mining town. You had to put up with, not put up with, but you were living with miners. You were living with, there was a fishery in Central Patricia, Ontario. And what happened is we had a lot of racism, we had a lot of attitude, we had a lot of there was only one bar in this little town, Central Patricia. So, you know, there was a lot of action going on for a little town. We had the natives coming in from the, from the reserve, Osnaburg, coming into Central Patricia to party for the weekend. We had miners partying, we had fisheries partying, and then we had the locals, the white people that lived in Central Patricia partying. And then, you know, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, I remember that as a kid. And meanwhile, we got shipped to Shinwalk down in Sault Ste. Marie. But when the residential school policy was in effect, and my mother's kids, myself included, got taken to Shinwalk, she had nothing else to do. She got all, depressed, confused, and whatever else set in, that she started drinking, and my family started drinking quite a bit. And by the time we got back a year and a half later, no visits, nothing, we got sent back to Central Patricia, Ontario. By that time, my mother's alcoholism had set in. Alcoholism, it took me years and years to understand the alcoholism. I went through alcoholism, I went through homelessness, I went through drug addiction, I went through a whole lot of time spent in jails and different institutions and that. And it took me a long time to understand what happened with my mother and alcoholism. So by the time we got back from Sault Ste. Marie into Central Pat again, because of the residential school policy, my mother's alcoholism had set in. Not just my mother, but there's a lot of other people in this town that started drinking heavy because their kids got taken away and stuff like that. And then it was a mining town. You had a lot of people at this bar, and not just Central Pat, but you had Pickle Crow, you had Central Pat, and Pickle Lake, all within this little area here. So there's a kind of like a big, a lot of chaos by the time we got back from the first residential school that we went to in Sault Ste. Marie. So since there was a lot of chaos, by the time we got back to Central Pat, there was nobody at the house. There was no food at the house. There was no, it wasn't your functional, state of living. We didn't have, my mother had broken up with my dad and stuff like that. And there was no father figure in the house. I had to live with my uncles and my cousins, my grandmother, and we were all growing up. But like I said, Central Pat had been a mining town, and there was a lot of drinking in the one bar, the liquor store, and everything else. And so there's this big party going on by the time we got back from the first residential school. My mother's alcoholism had set in, and other family members, other families, that's all they ever did was drink, and drink some more. So since everybody was drinking, and I'm just a kid at that time, we ended up, I ended up in a kind of, through peer pressure and through force, we ended up breaking into places. We ended up stealing skidoos. We ended up robbing people. We ended up beating up people, and we formed into little gangs because there was little gangs in this town. There was gangs in this town, and there was a whole lot of fighting in that, and you had to kind of get into your own group to survive. So that's the life I returned to after I went to the first residential school. So it's all chaos here. And like I keep on saying, my mother's alcoholism had picked up because of that policy, residential school policy. And that's exactly what happens when you extract kids from families, a mother, a father. They go into this state of mind where they get all depressed and all these other moods set in. So I can only imagine what happened to my mother when her kids got taken away and sent off to residential school. So because there was a lot of chaos, we ended up getting into a whole lot of trouble back then. And the thing about that is we picked up charges, and we got taken to this little courtroom in Pickle Lake in Central Pat, Ontario. And all I remember of that court case is standing. I remember asking my uncle, I said, "Tommy, what does not guilty and guilty mean?" And I remember him just looking down at me and sort of just smiling, and him saying, "Well, just plead not guilty," because we had racked up a whole lot of charges. And I remember standing in front of the judge and him going, "Well, how do you plead?" And I remember going, "Not guilty. Not guilty, not guilty." And then I got bored and I said, "Guilty," because I just kept on saying not guilty to all these charges. And then I just to make it look good, I said guilty on one charge. But what happened there after that court appearance, that one